Ever since the release of the new Napoleon movie, the spotlight has been turned onto the Bonaparte family. With Napoleon's incredible rise to power from lieutenant to emperor of the French, a rather unknown family from Corsica suddenly came to fame and money. Today, we will be focusing on the life of Letizia Bonaparte, the mother of Napoleon. Maria Letizia Ramolino was born on August 24th in either 1749 or 1750. Her birthplace was the town of Ajaccio in the then Republic of Genoa. Her family came from low-ranking nobility, and her father, Giovanni Geronimo Ramolino, was an army officer. He, however, died when Letizia was only 6 years old. Letizia's mother, Angela Maria Pietrasanta, remarried a Swiss officer named Franz Fisch. With her new husband, Angela had 2 more children, Letizia's half-siblings. Young Letizia received a simple education at home where she was taught domestic skills. At only 14 years old, Letizia married Carlo Buonaparte, a 18-year-old law student. The marriage was arranged by their families for economic reasons. Both families had the same dialect, church habits, food habits, attire, and similar traditions. Letizia brought a dowry of 31 acres of land with a bakery and a mill into the marriage. Prior to their marriage, Carlo was studying law but left the university without a degree. Shortly after their wedding took place, Letizia found herself pregnant. She gave birth to a son named Napoleon on August 17, 1765. The baby, however, died shortly after its birth. 1.5 years later, Letizia gave birth to a girl, which they named Maria Anna. Unfortunately, she died 2 days before her first birthday. At that point, Letizia was already pregnant with their 3rd child. 6 days after her daughter Maria Anna passed away, she gave birth to Joseph. Joseph would be the couple's eldest surviving child. In 1768, Corsica was conquered by France. What followed was a Corsican guerrilla movement in which Letizia and Carlo would participate. At that point, Letizia was pregnant with her 4th child. Being heavily pregnant, however, did not stop Letizia from fighting for Corsican independence. Eventually, she returned to Ajaccio. On August 15, 1769, Letizia was attending a mass at the local cathedral when she suddenly went into labor. She returned home but did not make it to her room. She gave birth to the future Emperor of the French on a carpet in her living room. According to a legend, the battles of Iliad and Odyssey were woven into the carpet. Letizia would give birth to 9 more children. In total, 8 of them survived to adulthood. Letizia had one servant who would look after the children while she cared for all the household chores. By 1779, the Bonapartes were elevated to nobility. This enabled them to give their children a better education. As such, young Napoleon was able to attend cadet school in Brienne from 1779 onwards. Napoleon was not allowed to leave the school grounds for the next 6 years. Even visits from parents were not allowed during this time. Letizia, however, somehow managed to visit her son in 1884. Letizia was widowed on February 24, 1785, when Carlo suddenly died of stomach cancer. His death at only 38 came 4 months after she gave birth to their last child, Jerome. Letizia's eldest son, 17-year-old Joseph, was not the head of the family. He, however, was not able to provide for his family, and as such they became dependent on Napoleon's salary as a lieutenant. By 1793, Napoleon had turned against former president of Corsica, Pascal Paoli, and the Bonapartes were forced to flee to France. Their house in Ajaccio was burned by supporters of Paoli. At that time, the reign of terror in France was at its peak. Letizia and her daughters had to be described as dressmakers, and the family settled in Toulon. However, as the British took over the port of the city, the family was once again forced to resettle. This time they moved to Marseille while Napoleon won his first major battle at the siege of Toulon. Consequently, he was promoted to brigadier general. His new income enabled him to move his family to the Château Salé. After Napoleon successfully won his first Italian campaign, Letizia and her younger children moved back to Ajaccio. In the meantime, their house was rebuilt and renovated. When Napoleon became the first consul of the French Republic, Letizia moved to Paris. Despite now living off a pension of 25,000 francs monthly, Letizia was known to live a simple lifestyle. On May 18, 1804, Napoleon became the first emperor of the French. Napoleon made all of his siblings, except for Lucien and Jerome, imperial highnesses. Consequently, the search for a suitable title for Letizia began. Eventually, Napoleon settled on Madame Mère for her, which means Madame Mother. On December 19th of that same year, Napoleon crowned himself emperor at the Notre Dame in Paris. Although Letizia is depicted in this famous painting of his coronation, she did not attend the service. In fact, Letizia was busy moving her home from Rome to Paris on that very day. She moved into a house which she bought from her son Lucien at 92 Rue Saint-Dominique. During the time in which Napoleon acted as emperor of the French, Letizia remained in the background and did not live at the imperial court. Napoleon granted his mother 500,000 francs each year. Later, Letizia would live at the Château de Pont-sur-Seine, a castle which Napoleon gifted her. In 1812, Napoleon began what would turn out to be his downfall, the invasion of Russia. Napoleon marched into Russia with over 400,000 men and returned with less than 100,000. His army was now weakened, and what soon followed was the War of the Sixth Coalition. Napoleon was defeated at the Battle of Leipzig, and the Allies took over Paris. They forced Napoleon to abdicate and restored the Bourbon monarchy. It was decided that Napoleon should be exiled to the island of Elba. Letizia and her daughter Pauline, who was the favorite sister of the former emperor, joined. Letizia joined Napoleon when he left Elba and came back to power for 100 days in 1815. In the end, Napoleon was defeated at the Battle of Waterloo. It was then decided to ban Napoleon once and for all. Consequently, he was brought to St. Helena. Letizia saw her second eldest son for the last time on June 29, 1815, at the Château of Malmaison. After saying goodbye to Napoleon, Letizia left for Rome, where Pope Pius VII had allowed her to live. Pauline also joined her mother in Rome, where they lived under the protection of the Pope. Funnily enough, Pope Pius VII was once a prisoner of Napoleon. Letizia purchased a palace, which she renamed to Palace Bonaparte. Letizia continued to live a quiet life in Rome after the downfall of Napoleon. Her half-brother was one of her only visitors during her last years of life. Now she would benefit from the humble lifestyle she led while her son was at his peak. Through the investments she made and jewelry she sold, she was able to live out the remainder of her life comfortably. The former so-called Madame Mère passed away on February 2, 1836, at the age of either 85 or 86. Letizia had been paralyzed and nearly blind prior to her death. She outlived Napoleon by 15 years and survived 7 more out of the 13 children she birthed. Her eldest son Joseph was the only one of her children who was by her bedside when she passed away, and she outlived her husband by over 50 years. 15 years after her death, her body was reinterred at an imperial chapel in Ajaccio, which was especially built for her. Her husband Carlo was reinterred next to her 100 years later in 1951.